Hello everyone. First of all, thank you for joining us in this video. My name is Julio Perez and I'm a solutions engineer here at Arista Networks. Today we'll be going over AVD and Python virtual environments. For the agenda today, we are going to be going over, first of all, what is a virtual environment, why we should use one, a little bit about going over the built-in venv module that comes prepackaged with Python, and as well as switching Python versions for a project. If you look at this diagram here, we have sort of a simple representation of our Python install in our OS, right? We have package 1 v1, package 2 v1, and these could come pre-installed with your OS because they could rely on this for certain tasks. Now, we wouldn't want to install packages globally that could impact the global Python installation. So in this case, we rely on Python virtual environments to sort of package all of our requirements for a project into one contained area. In this case, in this Python 3 venv project or virtual environment, we have package 1 on version 3 and package 2 on version 3. So you can see how we can separate the dependencies between the global Python installation and installation specific to our projects. When we jump into our code editor, you'll actually see a directory structure that is mimicking this ATD AVD repository on our Arista Net DevOps community Git repo. In this example, this repository is sort of pre-built for running in our ATDs. In this case, it's going to be deploying a L3LS network with 2 spines and 4 leaf nodes. For this example, we're focusing just on the Python virtual environments and getting everything installed so we can actually leverage the Ansible AVD collection. So here I'm currently in my code editor. I can start by just initializing Python just to see where we're at. So in this case, we can see that my OS is running Python 3.10.9, so that's sort of the base OS for this install. And if I do something like import PyAPI, it's a Python package to sort of interact with our EOS nodes programmatically with Python. And we can see that I don't have that module, right? PyAPI is not installed. So let's get out of that. Now, if we want to create a Python virtual environment, we can do Python 3-m, excuse me if I could type, and then, so let's run through this command. So we have Python 3-m venv, which is the module, and then the name of the virtual environment. In this case, I usually just always name mine venv. Some people use .venv, some people use virtual env. I mean, it just depends. In my case, I pretty much always use venv. And I'm actually going to change, well, let's actually run this without the prompt, just for example's sake. So you can see on the left, we have a new folder called venv, which sort of sets up this folder structure so we can actually interact with our virtual environment in our little prepackaged Python environment. If I want to now enable, so by default right now, I'm still using the base Python OS version. If I go to source venv bin activate, you can see that actually my shell is updated to venv to kind of let you know that your virtual environment is now active, right? But now if I do something like pip3 install PyAPI, and pip, for anyone that's not aware, is the go-to essentially way to install different Python packages for your installation. If you're going to work with different projects or have different dependencies, you're definitely going to leverage pip down the road. So let's see. Now if I drop into, again, Python 3, but in this case, if I do import PyAPI, oh, excuse me, if I could type. So you can see now that it's actually installed in our virtual environment. So let me get out of that real quick. And okay, so now this virtual environment is activated, but what if you're done using it, or maybe you're going to build another one for a different project? We can simply run deactivate, and that will set us back to the base Python installation. And if you are completely done with this virtual environment, as far as I'm trying to clean this up and I don't need it anymore, we can simply run remove-rf and then your virtual environment folder, and that virtual environment is now gone. Now, I previewed this a little bit earlier, but something that we can do, we can actually initialize the Python virtual environment, but sort of change that prompt. Now, the counter argument to that is we could just change the name of venv to something more specific, but the prompt gives you an option to just set it to something that makes a little bit more sense to you. Maybe you're switching between projects a lot, and if you use venv for every project, it could be confusing to which one you actually want to use. So in this case, very similar command. I'm creating the Python 3 virtual environment with a prompt. So now if I source this, we can see that our prompt's actually been modified. Now, the goal of this video was actually to start leveraging the Ansible AVD collection. So in this case, this is a framework to deploy different types of networks and topologies using Arista EOS nodes. Let's see, if I want to, for example, if I wanted to get started, I'll go to the installation, the collection installation. And there's a couple things here. So for example, we need to install Python 3.8 or later, which we do. We're on Python 3.10, and we need Ansible core 2.11.13 to 2.14.x. In my case, I'll just install a version that's less than 2.14. Great. So now I'm back on my editor. If I do, let's see, pip3 install, again, the virtual environment's already been activated. We can do pip3 install and then double quotes ansible-core less than 2.14.0. Okay, awesome. So we can actually view what's installed with that. So if we do pip list, we can see some of the packages that come with that installation of Ansible core. And just as an example, if we actually deactivate that and do pip list again, you can just see the vast difference in Python packages. So let's actually activate that one more time. Okay, so we have Ansible core installed, fantastic, but now we actually need to install the collection. Now, traditionally it's done by running Ansible Galaxy collection install arista.avd. So if you don't have it installed, you could just simply run Ansible Galaxy collection install arista.avd. If you do, but you want to upgrade, you could actually pass the -- force flag, and that'll upgrade your AVD version. For example, if you're running something like 3.7.0, we just released 3.8.1 at the time of this recording, so you should be upgraded to 3.8.1. But if I just want to check what I have as far as collections, so here I can see that I have the NetCommon collection, utils, AVD, CVP, and EOS. So I'm already running AVD 3.8.1, so I don't really need to upgrade. But let me just go back to the instructions so I can kind of continue along with installing any of the other dependencies. So back on the installation guide, so we have Ansible core installed, great. We have the arista.avd collection installed, but we need to install additional Python requirements. In this case, this is pretty slick. Feel free to use this command. What we're essentially doing here is we're exporting an environment variable that actually leverages that Ansible Galaxy collection list command to point to where our collection is installed. Now, the advantage of this is we can actually point then to the requirements.txt file that is within the installed collection. That way you can sort of make sure you're always running the correct versions of Python packages when you're upgrading or using specific versions of the AVD collection. So in my case, I'll just copy this and then we'll run it in the code editor. Okay, so we're back on the code editor and I'll just paste those two commands and we should get all of the requirements we need to actually leverage the AVD collection. So now, just for example, let's say, just a test, right? We already have some pre-made playbook, and actually I could show you that. So let's see, fabric build, and let me just move this down a little bit. This playbook will essentially leverage the EOS designs and EOS CLI config gen roles from the AVD collection and generate all of our structure configuration, generate our raw EOS CLI configuration for EOS nodes. And so let me close that. Nothing too fancy, but the point of this is to show you that we have all of the requirements installed and we are correctly executing the AVD collection within Ansible. So we can run, Ansible-playbooks, and then the name of the playbook. Pretty simple there. Awesome. Okay, so that's complete. And just as an example, we can see some of the output that was created. So if I go to ATD inventory, documents, devices, if we can just look at leaf 1, for example, And I won't spend too much time on this, but we can see just some of the output from Leaf 1 of everything that was configured as far as name servers, DNS, let's see, MLAG, routing. It's pretty lengthy, but just as an example. And then there's also, one moment, we can look at actually the intended config. So there's structured configuration, which is in YAML format, as you see here. And there's also the raw configuration. So for example, this is Leaf 1's raw configuration that'll be sent to the node, depending if you want to leverage just, directly connecting to EOS nodes or something like our CVP management platform. So up to this point, we've created a virtual environment. We've installed Ansible core. We've installed the Arista AVD collection. We have all of the required dependencies and we're executing correctly. But as you saw earlier, my system's actually running Python 3.10. So if I go back to Python 3, you can see it's 3.10.9. Now, what the venv module does well is obviously creating these virtual environments, but it doesn't do a good job of, let's say we want to switch a Python version. Let's say we're working with a project and maybe your base OS has something like 3.6, but the package needs 3.7 and above. Maybe it needs 3.7 up to 3.10, but maybe the maintainers of the project aren't quite ready for 3.11, just as an example. But something we can use to manage our Python versions is a tool called PyEnv. So in this case here, we're actually looking at the PyEnv repository. If I scroll down a little bit, they actually do a great definition of, well, what is it, right? So PyEnv lets you easily switch between multiple versions of Python. So currently I'm running Mac OS. There's a couple ways. You can either install PyEnv by running brew install pyenv-virtual env if you want to use the virtual env plugin with PyEnv. In our case, we're just going to leverage PyEnv on its own to install different versions of Python. In that case, you would just have to run brew install PyEnv, but we'll link to everything we've shown you here as well as instructions on how to install PyEnv for your specific flavor of OS. So in this case, I've already run PyEnv, so we will just get rid of this. With PyEnv, depending on your shell, you'll probably have to add a bit of commands to your configuration. It's all documented in the PyEnv documentation, but in my case, I had to append essentially these 3 commands to get PyEnv working correctly. So if we just clear that. So let's get started with PyEnv. So first thing we can do is just view what versions we have installed. So in this example, I have the base system version. I have 3.8.16 and 3.9.13. We already know the system version is 3.10. So if I go to Python 3, we can see it's on 3.10.9. In my case, if we wanted to install a different version, it's as simple as PyEnv install and then the Python version you'd like. This does take a little bit of time. I've already run this. Now that we have Python 3.8.16 installed, we can actually set it to work with our project. So in that case, we can do PyEnv local 3.8.16. Now in that case, this will actually create a .python-version file, which actually lists 3.8.16 up here. You could actually do a global version of that command, which is PyEnv global, and then the Python version. In this case, I'll just leave it specific to the project that I want to leverage 3.8.16. So now, for example, if we do Python 3, now we're running 3.8.16. So pretty interesting tool to use if you want to test different versions of Python, or if your projects require different versions of Python. So let's get out of this. And what I'll do is I will actually still leverage the built-in venv module. So in this case, if we paste this, I will create a new virtual environment, and I'm going to set a prompt for 3.8.16. So fairly similar at this point. Now that we have PyEnv running with our alternate versions of Python, the rest of the commands are the same as we did when we weren't working within PyEnv. So we can activate our virtual environment, and let's see, we can do our pip3 install of Ansible core. can also install the additional dependencies from the collection. Awesome. Okay, and then now we'll just test the playbook to make sure that it's executing properly and just to show that everything's been installed correctly. Awesome, so that's finished executing. Just like before, if you wanted to deactivate your virtual environment, we could just run deactivate. And if you're completely done with your virtual environment, we could just remove it, same as we did before we even leveraged PyEnv. In that case, that's all we have for today. I hope you enjoyed. I hope you learned something along the way. Thank you, and stay tuned for next videos.